Today we're going to be looking at two very big points of contention between the Democratic and Republican sides of the American political discussion. Number one is DACA, or the Deferred Actions for Childhood Arrivals Act, and number two is gun control and gun violence in America. Since 2017, the Trump administration has been trying to get rid of DACA, and in June of this year, we're going to find out the ruling by the Supreme Court on whether DACA should be continued or whether it should be repealed. Now, the Democrats in this debate say that DACA has two main reasons why it should not be repealed. Number one is that the illegal immigrants who came here as children did not make the conscious decision to do so, right? To say that these children, who were often below the ages of like 10, could make the decision to cross the border by themselves and hence should face the punishment of deportation because of that should not be morally or politically enforced by the legislative branch and the executive branch of the government. Number two is that those who came here as children now provide a lot to the economy. See, the undocumented immigrants who are here in America right now actually provide a lot to us because they are Americans just like us. See, they got the same education as us and they work the same jobs as us, and removing them would effectively remove hundreds of thousands of workers, and it would also reduce the American GDP growth by $22.7 billion annually. On the Republican side of this debate, there's three main reasons why many believe that DACA should be repealed. Number one is that the people who are in America right now, called Dreamers, or the people that are protected by DACA, are the people who are still undocumented immigrants. Hence, they shouldn't really be here by their standards. They can say that a lot of the citizens of America who don't have jobs could blame it on the fact that a lot of these undocumented immigrants do have jobs, and they're taking hundreds of thousands of them up by being here. And they shouldn't really have those jobs because they came here unfairly. A lot of the people that make this argument say that the people that come here aren't really American enough to qualify for taking our jobs. To counter this argument, many Democrats say that if you were born and you were raised in America and you went through the American schooling system and you have the experiences of any other American, you are just as American as the person next to you. See, I'm an Indian Asian and my parents came from Asia to America, and now we're here, and I don't feel like I'm any less American than anybody else. Sure, I'm a different color, sure, I speak a different language sometimes, but I'm just as American as anybody else, as any other Hispanic, any other Caucasian, any other African American person living around here. So what this argument really says is that those who came here as undocumented immigrants really shouldn't have those jobs, right? But, like I said before, it wasn't their conscious decision to come here. So disregarding the fact that they didn't choose to come here, and factoring that they are just as American as the rest of us, there's no case to be made that they don't deserve those jobs. Number two is that they break the law by living here. Now, this is inherently a correct argument by saying that they are illegal immigrants. However, like I said before, they did not make the conscious decision to come here. A lot of them were like 5 years old when they came to America, and when you're 5 years old, you really don't have the facilities to even cross the border, let alone do it by yourself. So if you're going to blame a 5-year-old for coming here because their entire family came here and get mad at them and tell them to go back to their country because they just wanted to stay with their family at such a young age, it's morally incorrect. And hence they should be allowed to live here in America because, like I said before, they are just as American as the rest of us. Number three is that a lot of Dreamers just take up resources without paying taxes. Now, if you really look at this, a lot of the Dreamers that come to America, that are in America right now, are minors. Now, every minor across America doesn't pay taxes, so to say that these Dreamers should pay taxes is just false, because that's not how America works, right? And those who are old enough to pay taxes often do pay taxes, and those who don't are breaking the law and should be prosecuted through American channels, because that's how American legislation works with other Americans. Like I said before, and for the third time now, they are just as American as the rest of us. Gun violence in America is an epidemic, and many Americans blame our current legislation as to why this epidemic is just spreading all over the country and ravaging so many people's lives and families all across the nation. On the Democratic side of this debate, there's three main points made for gun control in America. Now, this is not to say that guns should be outright completely banned, because there are people that use guns for good. Right? Amy Klobuchar often uses the reference of her Uncle Dick, who is just a hunter from a hunting state here in Minnesota. So not everybody wants guns to be taken away. However, we do need a lot better control over this gun violence epidemic in America. So the 3 points that the Democrats make actually revolve around this one main principle. It's too easy for people to obtain guns in America, and oftentimes first-time buyers of guns can get their guns granted to them actually with fair ease, right? You see, if you're a shooter, right, and you want to commit an act of terrorism on America, and you want to get your first gun through legal channels, doing so is not very hard to do as of right now. Now, if we had better background checks, this would actually help Americans in the long run, because even though it might take longer for people who want a gun to have a gun, this is necessary for safety measures with such dangerous objects and items that are just distributed to Americans at a very, very high volume. Number 2 is background checks. See, background checks are already prevalent in America, but they need to be expanded as well as becoming more in-depth for the average American to not be able to get a firearm with such ease. Number 3 is that assault rifles are way too powerful, right? You see, an AR-15 can shoot rounds at 600 rounds per minute. Nobody really needs this for any means of whatever. Other than hunting and gun enthusiasts, you shouldn't really be able to get your hands on an AR-15. Now, Senator Amy Klobuchar says that we should just make sure that those who get these guns are people who are mentally stable and just, want to hunt. But, in my opinion, guns like these just shouldn't be sold at all. Because as much as hunting is a hobby for a lot of people, the lives of Americans are far more important. And so, if we save lives of Americans by cutting down a few guns that hunters can't use, it would be far more effective than letting those guns run wild and having a lot more Americans die because of them. On the Republican side of this debate, there's 3 main points that are made. Number 1 is that firearms are needed for protection. If you have a pistol and it's the middle of the night and somebody comes into your house, right, it's very necessary for you to be able to use that pistol to protect your family. As well as this, even if your house doesn't get burglarized, you want to make sure that you have some sort of protection against acts of robbery and theft and home invasion that are committed as often as every 2 seconds in America. Number 2 is that it's a constitutional right. Now, the Founding Fathers said when making the Second Amendment that everybody in America above the age of 18 should have the right to bear arms. Now, this means that they have the right to a firearm to protect themselves against militias and a tyrannical government. Number 3 is that criminals will get guns anyways because they're breaking the law by wanting to commit heinous acts on the American people, so they're going to break the law to get their guns anyways, right? But when you really look at it, and when you really compare the Democratic and Republican sides of this debate, we can see that when paired with statistics and reasoning, the Democratic argument actually prevails on top. In June of 2015, the LA Times reported on statistics by the Violence Policy Center about gun violence and justifiable homicides in self-defense in the year of 2012. Now, in the year of 2012, there were 259 justifiable cases of self-defense homicide. So that means somebody broke into your house, somebody was trying to murder you, somebody did something to you that could be classified as a violent crime, and you protected yourself by using a firearm or using something to commit a homicide against those in self-protection. However, in the same year of 2012, there were 1.2 million violent crimes in the same year, and this includes murder, aggravated assault, rape, and robbery. Now, comparing these two statistics, we can actually see that 259 justifiable homicide cases compared to 1.2 million violent crimes that those 259 people had to protect themselves against makes the owning of guns really, really ineffective at the end of the day. Because if only 259 cases were solved by guns and 1.2 million cases ended up far worse, we can say that owning guns doesn't really make any difference and only saves a small amount of lives at the end of the day. However, this isn't to say that people shouldn't own guns. This is to say that those who want to commit those acts of violent crimes shouldn't get the guns in the first place. The Violence Policy Center also said to balance the 259 justifiable self-defense homicide cases with the amount of guns stolen in robbery every single year. Of the 232,000 guns stolen every single year by criminals, 172 of those are from home robberies. So when you compare those two numbers, 259 and 172,000, the math works out that for every single justifiable self-defense homicide case, 896 guns are stolen. So by buying more guns and by giving over 300 million guns to the American people, we actually see that more guns can cause more violence, because for every time that somebody protects themselves with a gun, 896 guns are in the hands of criminals. Now, the statistics back up the point that protection isn't really effective and the gun isn't really a good deterrent to violent crimes. Because like I said before, 1.2 million violent crimes in 1 year and only 259 justifiable self-defense homicide cases were reported, right? So when people say that owning a gun is going to protect them, it's only going to protect them 259 out of 1.2 million% of the time. Now, the second argument is that the Founding Fathers made America so that the Second Amendment stayed around for as long as possible. Now, looking at this argument, we actually have to take 2 steps back. Number 1, we have to look at what the Founding Fathers did. So the Founding Fathers, in making the Constitution, they wrote down the Second Amendment to protect the American people from militias and from a tyrannical government. Nowadays, there's no real militias around, so we can only look at a tyrannical government, right? And a lot of Republicans take this tyrannical government argument and they run with it, saying that the American government is going to go corrupt one day because of Democrats, and Democrats are going to try to instate a socialist state all over America, right? But if you really think about it, that argument doesn't make sense. Because when you use Republicans' logic that the Founding Fathers were right in this situation, we can also say that the Founding Fathers were right in the building of the government itself. Now, what I mean by this is that the Founding Fathers made America, so there was no chance in the first place of a tyrannical government ever being instated. See, before the Founding Fathers made America, they were fighting British rule, and British rule was actual tyranny. In America, there's no possible way that all 3 branches of government, with the thousands and thousands of people inside of them, would band together to make one tyrannical state over the 340 million people that live here. So, if you really think about it, right, to say that there's a possibility of a tyrannical government being instated in America right now is absolute conspiracy. Let's just say the impossible situation of a tyrannical government does happen one day, right? What are Republicans going to do then? They're going to use their AR-15s to protect themselves against a tyrannical government. But what they don't know is that instead of just pulling up to their house with like small pistols or like baseball bats, the government is going to pull up to their house with tanks. And when they open their door and they're shooting at the tank, the bullets are just going to bounce off the hull of this major machine made by the American military that's there to raid their house and take over whatever they call home anymore. So to say that this AR-15 is somehow going to protect them in this tyrannical government situation is false. And the ownership of them and the argument that that's going to actually work is also false. There's no way that you owning your ARs is going to protect you in any way against the power and the brute force of the American military. In more laconic words, saying that the Second Amendment was made for a reason and should still be instated to this day is false, because it was made 244 years ago and it is not the America that we live in nowadays. Finally, the argument that criminals will get guns illegally can be shut down purely by statistics. Of the 117 major terrorist acts on America using a firearm since 1982, 82 of them were by legally registered firearms. Now, if we can narrow the channel and the opportunity to get these guns, we can mollify the effects of this gun violence epidemic in America. Not only will it save hundreds of thousands of lives in years to come, it will also save us a lot of time in this debate while the deaths rage on. My name is Abhinav Kumar, and thank you for watching.